soon, just bear with it. There we go. Okay, so hello everyone. Thank you so much for coming today and attending this webinar and giving up some of your precious time to spend it with me. I really appreciate it. Hopefully you'll get something out of today and go away with some ideas. So I just want to start by saying that I'm a practicing teacher. In fact, I was in the classroom this morning. I work in a language school in Cambridge in the UK. And the majority of our students at Bell are preparing for university, whether that's in the UK or in their own country. So I'd like to share with you today some of the ideas I have used with my students that help them to develop their own ideas and their own thinking skills, and hopefully you'll be able to take one or two things away with you. I remember quite a long time ago in my teaching career, I remember doing a lesson with a group of students. It was a speaking lesson. And the topic was something like, should smokers be allowed to receive the same kind of free healthcare from the government that non-smokers do? And it was a very nice lesson. I had students from various countries and they came up with lots of different ideas. And they had a big debate about it, and then the homework was to create an essay based on that topic. And it all worked fine. But there was one student who was not at the lesson, and he came afterwards and he asked me for the homework, and I gave him the topic, and he looked at it and just said, how do I know what to say? I've got no idea how to talk about this or what to say. Just please help me. And it was then that I realized that for a lot of students, it's not actually how they say it in English, it's actually what to say in the first place. So I'd like today to talk about, well, the first half of the webinar, I'd like to talk about ideas for really scaffolding tasks, so that if we ask students to discuss something, that we take them from zero, we don't just expect them to go from 0 to 10 and come up with ideas immediately, but that we scaffold it so that we take them step by step to be able to develop their own ideas and thinking. The second half of the webinar is going to be ideas for kind of creative thinking, getting students to push themselves and think in maybe silly, creative ways. Okay, so it is very interactive, hopefully, so I'm going to ask you to participate and try out some of the activities. Okay. Right, let's have a look at the next slide then. Okay, I think there were 3 reasons why that student that I just talked about had some problems. I think the first problem was that perhaps his educational background was such that he wasn't used to having to discuss things like this, you know, that it was a lot about learning, not necessarily about analysing and creating essays with your own ideas and opinions. The second thing was that I'm pretty sure he came from a culture where the topic really wasn't relevant. I don't think it's something that will have been talked about in his country, and so he won't have had any information about it at all. And that's really the third thing for me, is if you don't have information about a topic, it's very difficult, isn't it, to actually create ideas and opinions. So the first activity I'd like to look at is one that I've used to really assess what students know about a topic and what they don't know. So the discussion questions that we're going to look at in today's session are all from Skillful, and I want to imagine that you're using your course book and you're starting a new unit, and the topic is sprawl, urban sprawl, the idea that everyone's moving from countryside to cities and cities are growing ever bigger. Of course, we might want students to discuss things about that topic, but if they don't know about that topic, it's going to be very difficult. So one thing I do is to take photographs that are related to this topic and put them around the classroom, and underneath each photograph is a blank piece of paper. And students have to walk around the room and they have to write a question, just an information question using things that we've got here on this slide: when, which, where, how often. They ask an information question about that photograph. Very simple. They write one question and then move on to the next photo and write a question about that one. So let's have a look at a couple of photos here. Okay, so these are related to the topic of urban sprawl. So perhaps I can ask you to just type into the chat box in the bottom left corner there, maybe a question about one of these pictures that you'd like to know, using what, where, how many, and so on. So I'll just give you a few seconds to have a think about that and type it into the box. Thanks, Alison. Fast typist there. Which country is it in? Okay, good. How far does he have to carry this bundle? Where is it? Where's the man going? What's he carrying? Okay. When were the pictures taken? Where do they go? How old is the boy in the second photo? Why is he carrying it? Okay, great. Great question. So obviously as students walk around the room, they build up the questions because they can't repeat them. So they're having to ask different questions each time, which makes it more difficult as they move around and pushes them to think of things that maybe aren't so obvious in the first place. Oh, how many hours did you have to work? That's a good one, yeah. So what I might do then is take the photograph and put students into groups or pairs and give them each a photograph with the questions, and they then have to discuss the answers. Now, of course, they're not going to know them. They might know, it depends on the photograph and it depends really on the topic. The ones that we've just looked at, I don't think they're going to know, but they can speculate based on knowledge that they've got. So using the kind of language that we've got here. And students discuss those topics, discuss those questions, come up with ideas, speculate, and then they can share with each other maybe things that they're not sure about. We can open it up to the whole class. And together we sort of push information towards each other, pass it on, and the teacher is assessing all the time, what do the students know, what do they not know? Because then as the teacher, I'm thinking about future lessons and what I can do to pass information on to them, to help them, and then they can start to form opinions and ideas. It's also a really good basis for doing research. So you've got lots of questions there about particular photographs. You can't answer them. Students can go away and do some research and then report back to the class later. So it's a really nice student-centered activity. They're asking the questions, they're doing the answering, and the teacher is monitoring and assessing and thinking about future lessons. I think it's really important to get students asking questions, not just, I mean, these kinds of questions are fairly simple, they're informational, but really good thinkers are people who question things. Now, if I think about us, before that, if we look at this question here, for example, number 3, what do you think government should do to prepare for future migration from rural to urban areas? If students have lots of information that we've fed into the lesson, then they're much more likely to be able to answer that kind of discussion question. And we're not just getting them to answer it cold with no information at all. Okay, thinking then about questions for the teacher. Now, we obviously ask students a lot of questions in the classroom and elicit a lot of information from them. If we take a look at Bloom's taxonomy here, so Bloom's 7 learning objectives, the idea here that there are 7 different ways that perhaps we think, or 7 different thinking skills. Slightly different terminology here to the one he created some time ago, but we think of knowledge and understanding as being fairly simple learning objectives, and then it goes through to apply, analyze, evaluate and create, which is much more challenging. And here what I think is nice, if you look at Google Images and search for Bloom's taxonomy and questions, you'll find a lot of charts like this with a lot more questions in that I've managed to fit on this slide. So here you can actually find questions that relate to different types of thinking, so that we're not always asking what, when, where, who. That's a good basis. That provides information and get us thinking about that. But as we encourage our students to be better thinkers, we can use questions related to the other things. So do they understand? Can they put it into their own words? Can they apply it to another situation? How is it similar or different to something else? So analysing, evaluating and then creating. And this is quite good for us because it can help us to plan lessons and think of different questions that we can ask students as we progress through our course. Okay, I'd like to think then, oh yes Arthur, you can get a copy of these slides. I believe there will be a link to them at the end of the session, so thank you for that. That's a good reminder. I should have said that at the beginning. Okay, a question. Let's imagine that we want students to talk about, I think in the book it's actually imagine a world without a formal national identification system. What would it be like? Okay, so I'm going to scaffold it slightly. I'm going to change it a little bit and simplify it for now. What are the pros and cons of a formal national identification system? And here I think that we're really thinking about a national ID card rather than a passport. But first of all, I want to know what my students know about this subject again. So I might do a little quiz to get them thinking about knowledge. So here's a little quiz for you about identification. Fact or fiction? Okay, let's have a look at the first one. In these countries, everyone has to have a formal identification card. Germany, the USA, Japan and Argentina. Now, can you see where you've got the tick box? So above where it has all the names on the left-hand side of the page, if you can tick yes if you think this is true and no if you think it's false. Let's have a little discussion about that afterwards. Okay, so we've got quite a lot here. I think it's true. Okay, so, oh, a lot of people think it's true. Now interesting. Okay, going up. I think it's false. Maybe someone will correct me, but I believe in the USA there is no formal identification card. People carry a driving license or a passport, but they don't necessarily carry an identification card. What about question 3? I'm going to clear that. What about question 3? In the US in 2012, there was a new victim of identity fraud every 3 seconds. Do you think that identity fraud is such a problem? If you think yes, tick yes. If you think no, click on the cross. Okay, so again, people are thinking this one is yes, true. No idea, maybe. Okay. You're right, it is correct, apparently. There is identity fraud every 3 seconds. That's quite scary, isn't it? What about, I'll clear that again, what about number 5? Sorry, no, let's do number 4. Interpol say there are 1 million lost or stolen passports in circulation. What do you think? Have a guess. Gut feeling. Ah, this one's not so clear cut, okay. Okay, yeah, so we're really not sure here, are we? Actually, it's false. Interpol say there are 11 million lost or stolen passports in circulation, so it's a lot more than that, which again is very interesting. So a little quiz just to assess knowledge, maybe add in some knowledge to help students just to think about the different things that we might consider when we talk about identification. Now, a national identification card might not be something that many people think about. In Britain, we don't have a national ID card, and the government have talked about it in recent years, and people feel very strongly that they don't want one. So we're quite familiar with the arguments for and against one, but in other countries where you have one, and you've always had one, people have had one for a long time, probably not such an issue, and maybe our students that are asked to think about this topic have never actually questioned it before. So this is just providing some information and just opening their mind to the fact that not everything works the same in their country or their culture, but perhaps in other areas it's different. And also the fact that there are some issues to do with fraud and lost passports and things like that, which might affect the argument. So what I might do now is get students, again, we're looking at the question, what are the pros and cons of a formal identification system? Now, it can be very difficult for students to come up with those ideas if they have no idea about the topic. So what I've done is given students a list of points, and they have to decide if they're relevant or irrelevant to the question. So there's quite a long list here. Can you have a look through them, and can you just type in the box if you can see any letters, any statements that you think are irrelevant to this question. Okay, so this is a tricky one. There's a lot of reading here. Do any stand out as being irrelevant to the question? So if you can just type any letters that you think are irrelevant in the chat. Okay, maybe this is a difficult task to do in a webinar. I've done it in workshops before, and it's slightly nicer because you can talk to other people and discuss beforehand. Let me tell you what I think. I think B is irrelevant. I don't think that is a pro or a con. I don't think that's an advantage. Some people talk about it, but I don't think it's a pro or a con. I think D is perhaps irrelevant, although it might feed into A. And I also think that J is probably a bit irrelevant as well. So this is challenging. This is something I would do with higher level students. And when they discuss it together, they start to think about what the question means. And you're giving them some ideas of things to talk about with this subject, but they are having to really think hard about each of these points and think about their relevance or irrelevance. So although we're supporting them by giving them ideas, I'm not just giving it to them and then saying, like, now have a debate or discussion. They're having to think a bit more deeply. So let's move on to the next slide. What I would do then, now that they've come up with their ideas for, okay, these are relevant and these are irrelevant, I then get them to, well, I might put them into two groups. So half the class are pro and the other half are working with the cons. So they have to pull out the arguments that are relevant to their side, but then they have to rank them. So I'm now asking them to take them and to rank them according to importance. Which arguments do you think are the most important in this discussion and which are the least important? And this is really, really useful activity because it creates a lot of discussion. You can do a pyramid discussion where students start off ranking them on their own, giving them thinking time, which I think is really important. Then they work in pairs and they discuss it together and share and argue and come up with 5 in the most to the least important. And then the same thing, perhaps one pair with another pair. And it continues like that until maybe you have the whole class discussing it, or at least half the class discussing it, cons, and the other half the pros. And then they're much more ready to have a big debate or a big discussion about it. And because they've thought about it a lot, they then start to think about their own ideas and opinions. I'd like to share with you a really useful website. It's called debatabase.org. In fact, I'll just type it down the bottom here. Okay, I think that will be a link. No, let's try HTTP. Okay, so if you click on the link, you can actually go there. I'm just going to click away from here and click onto this one. So in a moment, the website will come up. It's a great website for creating, for finding out about debates and discussions, because it will have on there different different debates that you can bring into the classroom. And it also gives you ideas for and against the different points. It's not coming up. Here it is. Okay. So here we can see the home page, and I'm going to search for identity. Okay. Just to show you this particular debate, if I can find it. It's just being a bit slow. So essentially people have gone on and added, here we go, they've added lots of debates. And people have also added on the pros and the cons. And they've added on sources as well. So this is the debate topic here. The House would introduce compulsory identity cards. And what you have is a list of points for. And you have points against. So here you can see all the points for. It's explained. There's a lot more information. There's even links to sources. And on the right-hand side, you even have the counterpoint. So you have points for and points against. It's a great resource for teachers to help you to prepare for discussion and debates and to think of arguments and ideas and to do the kinds of tasks I mentioned where you give students ideas and they have to rank them and discuss them in that way. But also it's great for students to have a look at themselves and research information on it too. So I hope that's a useful link. I'll just go back, so debatabase.org or idebate.org as well. Okay. Moving on then, just a couple of little tips here. These are things that people have sort of said to me over the years on writing book editors and things like that. And I think they're quite simple ideas, but they are effective. Let's say we give students a discussion question, how has our relationship with the environment changed? It's very easy, isn't it, for our students to say, oh, it's changing this way. Finished. And then they stop discussing. If you give them a guideline, so think of at least 5 examples, you're pushing them a little bit further and showing them what you expect of them. So they don't just come up with the first 1 or 2 ideas. They have to come up with more ideas. And if you know that there are 5 possible ideas, then ask them to come up with them. And if they work together, they can do it. The idea with creativity is if you confine people, they will find ways to meet those sort of guidelines or break through them. So they will come up with 5 examples if you ask them. And another tip with a discussion question. So here's something. What do you consider the main causes of disease? Again, students will probably say something like viruses or bacteria or something like that. Again, it's finished, teacher, all done. But if you give them, again, some guidelines, so consider economics, lifestyle, emotional well-being, as well as medical reasons, and think of at least 2 examples for each. Not only are you pushing them to think harder, but you're also supporting them because you're telling them in the directions that they should think about. So sometimes we can take questions like this and really help to guide students a little bit more by just giving them some areas to think about, not expecting them to know those areas in the first place. Okay, another thing that I've used in students is they have to think of the question. So it's a discussion question and I'm giving them the answers. So here are 5 answers to the same discussion question. Can you tell me what that discussion question is, please? What would the world be like without electricity? What would happen if no electricity? Life in future. Okay. Can eat food. Yes, Andre. So what we have here are 5 answers, and my students will have to guess the question. So it's 1 question and 5 answers to the same question. Can you guess what it is? If we run out of petrol, World War III, electricity. Okay, all good answers, and it could be that there are more than one question. It could be several questions. But then it's just getting students to think about things in a slightly different way. So you might not want to give them all the answers to the question. You might want to give them some answers to the question, and then they have to add more answers once they understand what the question is. Let me show you what the question I thought it was here. Yes, I think a lot of you guessed that. You put electricity, energy. Yeah, exactly. Okay. So, I don't know if you're aware of Edward de Bono's six thinking hats, I should say. I'm sure many of you are. It's the idea that if you have a group of people trying to think of ideas, each person can wear a different thinking hat. And when you wear that thinking hat, you're required to think in a particular way. So if you wear a particular colour hat, then you are supposed to think very logically only about the facts. If you wear another colour hat, you have to think with your gut and don't care about the facts. You might be a cynical thinker. So there are different ways to think, and that can work very nicely and help students to think of different ways of thinking. But if we're talking about students who find it difficult to come up with ideas, my 5 caps, I've called it, is slightly different. What this does is force students to think of things from different perspectives. And I think that students can often find it difficult to think of things from different perspectives. And yet, for example, in general English, we might teach a lot of role plays. We might do a lot of role plays. We don't do it so much in academic English. But one of the benefits of role play, I think, is that it helps students to really develop their sort of freedom of speech in a way. They can think in a different way, and they can say things that they wouldn't normally say themselves. So if we use the same kind of thing in a discussion, then students can actually be free to say things or perhaps think things they wouldn't normally think. So if we look at question 2, how has social networking changed the lives of young people today compared to the previous generation of young people? Is it a change for the better? Then this discussion would probably last a little while, because my students, in fact I've used this, and students are fairly young and they have quite a lot to say about it. But it lasts longer if you create a group and give each of them a cap, so a role. So when I've used this, I've asked one student to be a teenager, and they have to think about how social networking affects their lives and how perhaps it's different to the lives of their parents when they were teenagers. Then I will ask one person to be the parent of the teenager, and they have to think about their perspective on the subject. Then you might have someone who works for the government, who works for a sort of think tank for young people and their perspective, a teacher and their perspective, and an employer and their perspective, an employer of young people and their perspective. And it's really interesting how far longer the conversation will last, and how interesting it is to see different aspects of this discussion and not just think about it from one point of view. So sometimes giving students different roles, and making them think of different perspectives, I think is useful. It gives them different ideas and not just come from their own personal experiences. Okay, I'd like to share with you another website. It's called 5-Minute Guardian Debates. I won't show you a link because it's quite slow. If you Google 5-Minute Guardian Debates, it should come up with the link. The Guardian is a newspaper in the UK, and they've started putting every week a 5-minute debate video with just 2 people discussing 2 sides of a particular topic. Now, it could be that it's not relevant to your context. Some of them are UK-based topics, something that's in the news. But something like this here might be relevant. So is an arts degree worth the tuition fees? Well, if your students are going on to do an arts degree and they do have to pay tuition fees, then that might be an interesting discussion for them to listen to before they then come up with their own ideas. And there's something for nuclear power, state and press and things like that. So it really depends on the topic. It depends on your context. But I think they're great little videos for B2 and above levels. Okay, moving on to problem solving. So sometimes we ask our students to come up with ideas, solutions to problems, and it can be quite difficult for students to think about them, especially if you're not that familiar with the problem in the first place. So one way to solve that problem is to use what business people call reverse brainstorming. And this is the idea that you take the question but you reverse it. So if we look at question 2, how do you think the problem of overconsumption can be addressed? If we reverse this question, then we'll get something like, what do you think the cause of overconsumption is? Now, I think it's much easier to think of the causes of overconsumption than it is to think about how to solve the problem of it. And so sometimes just by reversing the question, you can allow students to think in a slightly different way, and it really can help them. So getting them to play with the question can be useful. Let's have a try of that. So here we've got some questions. I'd like you to help me with this one. So the first question, what should we do to ensure the Earth's survival in future? What do you think the reverse of that question would be? So how would we take that question and change it a little bit so that we're kind of thinking of the opposite rather than the question that we have here? Perhaps not the Earth's survival, perhaps something else? How about, let's look at the second one. What could we do with that one? What should managers do to incentivize staff? What would the opposite of that be? What should managers do to, what could we say? So I think for the first one then, what should we do to ensure the Earth's survival in future? If we ask the question, what should we do to ensure the Earth's destruction in future? That's probably a much easier question to think about than it is to think about the solutions. And to the second question, what should managers do to incentivize staff? What should managers do to make staff feel thoroughly miserable? If you think about that, then you can start to address the issues and to perhaps think about some of the solutions to those problems. So sometimes reversing the question can be really helpful and can just make us think slightly differently. Now, going back to the question I asked before about addressing overconsumption, a decision tree can be really useful when we're thinking about solutions to problems. So perhaps with my students, I've got them reversing the question and they've thought about the causes of overconsumption, and that has then led on to thinking about solutions to overconsumption. Or perhaps you're going to give them some solutions to start them off and they have to add them. But what I'd like to do is to use a decision tree to really push students to think a little bit harder about these solutions, not just to come up with solutions, but to think about the impact of those solutions and what they really mean. So here, for example, they're looking at education campaign, and students then have to they have to think about what that really means. So what does it mean to have an education campaign? What will the results of this be? So perhaps it would be, well, it would be very expensive, wouldn't it? And perhaps it would only reach young people. So older people would maybe not be reached in some way, depending on what it is. That could take a long time for the solutions to really take effect, and so on. So what we're doing is to get students to think a lot more deeply about something, pushing them a little bit further. So it's not just come up with some solutions, but think about what they really mean. Oh, by the way, I created this decision tree using a website called MindMeister, mindmeister.com. You can create free mind maps. In fact, I'll just type it in the box. Here we go. You can create free mind maps. It's a great tool. It's really nice, and it makes it nice and visual for visual learners. Okay. So those are ideas for kind of scaffolding discussion tasks in the class, and I'd like to spend the last 10 minutes thinking about how to get students to be more creative in their thinking. Actually, this first task probably doesn't quite fall under that remit. This is a task I call Prove It. Now, we often make assumptions in our lives. We can't help it. We make assumptions all the time, and we base our ideas and opinions on those assumptions. And it's worth really helping students to understand that sometimes our assumptions are wrong, and that there are other assumptions or other ideas or facts that we haven't realised. So here are some assumptions that here are things that we often believe in the UK, some of which might be true and some of which might not be true. Now, the kinds of things that you choose are likely to be relevant to your culture. For example, body heat disappears mostly through the head. I mean, that's something that your mother would say to you in the cold of winter. If you grew up in a hot country, then perhaps it's not really relevant. Okay, so it's all true, especially the last one. Okay, so I would ask my students if they think it's true or not true. So the second one's not true, we think here. Okay, so students say which ones they think are true and aren't true, and they have to prove it to me. They have to go away and find proof that it is true. Now, this is really interesting because this opens up a whole new discussion about where to find good sources on the internet. As we know, there's a lot of information on the internet, and you will find these repeated in many places, but they're not necessarily good sources. So I'll tell you, I'm slightly nervous about this. I'll tell you the ones that I think are true or not true, because you're all having a discussion here about it. In Poland, you can find this information as well. Okay, so it's relevant to Poland. Good. Who invented this? These are sentences that I got from the, well, these are things that we know, and I searched for something like myths that are really untrue, or myths that are, or beliefs that are myths, or something like that. Right, the first one, water drains in a different direction in the north and south hemisphere. Do we think that's true or not true? Can we, I'm going to clear the thing. Can you click on yes? Click on yes if you think it's true, and no if you think it's not true. This is a very interesting one. Okay. Okay, so a lot of people are thinking it's true. Right, well, I'm slightly nervous about this because there's a lot of discussion on this on the internet. Scientific evidence, scientists seem to say that it's not true. That there is an effect, it's called, I don't know quite how to pronounce it, the Coriolis effect, that does something to water, but apparently it's not strong enough to affect our drains. It's not strong enough to affect bath water, the way you flush the toilet. Apparently the way they flush is determined by the design of the toilet or the bath or the sink. But believe me, there are lots of people that dispute that on the internet and believe that it's not true. Okay, so I'm going to leave that for you to look. That's what I believe, but it creates a lot of discussion in the class, and it's really interesting. The Great Wall of China is false. You can see lots of man-made objects from space. The Great Wall of China, I believe, is more difficult to see because it's not as tall as some other objects. Chicken soup, apparently, it sort of helps the cold. Apparently the bones have something in it that can help with sinusitis when you have a blocked nose, so sort of. Body heat doesn't disappear mostly through the head. Body heat disappears equally through all your parts of the body, through the skin. Eating carrots helps your eyesight. It stops it from degenerating, but not necessarily. It doesn't necessarily improve your eyesight, which is often what our mothers tell us when we're young. And women say 13,000 more words a day than men. I know this is a stereotype that exists in many cultures, however. Research that I've read suggests, this figure actually comes from a book. Someone wrote a book and claimed that that was true. But research that I've read about suggests that men and women speak equally. It depends on the context. And if men and women are in a mixed group, men tend to speak more than women, which is very interesting. So anyway, this is a really good discussion in class, get students talking a lot, and they can do research and think about sources. Okay, some connections here, right. On the left-hand side, there are 4 columns, pictures. Each column, there is a connection between the 3 pictures. Can you pick out, I think I've spoken more than 30, yes, I think I have today, that's true. I'll be very quiet for the rest of the session. Okay, in the left-hand side, there are 3 pictures. Can you connect the 3 pictures, please? Can you connect the pictures in the 2nd column, in the 3rd column, in the 4th column? Cheesy trainers, yeah, good one. They're not in the same column though. The Netherlands, yeah, that's right. So on the left-hand side we've got Rembrandt, cheese, and bike. So that's Holland. And the 2nd column, glass. Okay, I think that the 3rd picture is supposed to be Mars. Metal, okay, all good things. Technology, yeah. I was thinking it's the future, the future. The 3rd column? The 3rd column is water, yeah. And the final column? Weather? So yes, it could be weather, yeah. If we took the ice as hail. Final column? Inventions? Yeah, I'd say so. I'd say sort of man-made materials. Yeah, good idea. Now, that's fairly simple, but it's good to get students thinking about connections. That really helps them to think better. But if I move forward, I've now mixed these up even more. So we've got columns, rows, and diagonal rows. Can you find connections between any of them? So think creatively, think in a silly way. The idea here is that students are just coming up with ideas, and it doesn't matter how ridiculous. Means of transport diagonally. Yes, absolutely. The trainers, the car, and the bike. Shapes. Sneakers, yeah, okay. The 2nd one is movement. Okay. Bike and car, yeah, okay. So you're coming up with lots of ideas. I mean, there are silly things. For example, the middle column. Perhaps in future we'll use computerized glasses when we're driving cars in fog to help us to see better. Although they'll probably drive themselves by then. Yeah, I think they're kind of futuristic glasses, you're right. So just by getting students to think of connections between things, and it could be getting them to look back in their books and think about vocabulary that they've studied. Pick out some nouns and try and create some kind of connection between them. And it can be as silly as you like. Talking of silly, okay. Imagine that, again, I'm going to get my students to look back in their vocabulary notebooks, and I'm going to get them to pick out a word from their notebook. Can you pick a word from this list, as you don't have notebooks? Pick out a word from this list and just keep it in your mind. Okay, now I'm going to go to the next slide. Keep the word in your mind. Now, look at the first question. What drives people more, goals or punishment? Or the 2nd question, what was life like before the invention of electricity? Can you answer one of those 2 questions using the word that you actually remembered? Make an answer with that word, please. So lots of you are saying goals, but you have to justify it using the word that you remembered from here. Overpriced goods. Okay, before electricity, okay. Energy would be manually produced, okay. So don't forget to use the word that you have taken from your vocabulary notebook. Before invention, disaster. Yes, I love that. Okay. So silly answers are fine. It lets our students know that they can be creative, they can brainstorm ideas, and they don't need to feel embarrassed if they're a little bit silly. So it's a fun activity, and it also can review vocabulary as well and help students to think about their language. So the idea is that they produce a sentence and answer using the words that they have chosen themselves, or maybe you've given them. Right, final activity now, final minute or two. Here is an activity in Britain in primary schools. There's a lot of emphasis on philosophical discussions at the moment, and a lot of activities are used to help students to develop their thinking skills, and this I know is one that is used with primary kids. Of course, primary kids are very creative and have open minds. It's as we get older that we tend to become less able to perhaps question things or think as creatively. So here we have photographs, and again students have to come up with some questions, for example. But the idea here is that the question is on the theme of the photograph and not specifically on the photograph itself. So here we've got the theme of, well, old and new. Could be old buildings or new buildings. So the student has to think of a question. It could be something like, in the future, will all buildings before the 20th century have disappeared? Something like that. Or something simple like, is new always better than old? The idea is that when they ask their partner this question, they cannot see the photograph, so the question should make sense without needing the photograph. It's not a specific question about this photograph, these buildings, it's about the theme in general. Now I have another theory that we probably don't use I wonder enough in the classroom when we're teaching English. So we can really get students to wonder a lot more. I think wondering is a fantastic thing and we often do it. So perhaps get them making statements with I wonder. So I wonder if old buildings will have completely disappeared by the end of the century. Something like that. Okay. So let's move on to some pictures here. This is the final thing I'm going to ask you to do. Here are 4 photographs. Can you write some I wonder statements? I wonder what, I wonder where, I wonder why, based on the themes in these images, please. I wonder what the poor cat is thinking about. Okay, that's good. Now, it shouldn't be specific to this photograph. So if you take the photograph away and you say, I wonder what the poor cat is thinking about, then it's difficult to answer. So perhaps think of the theme. I wonder what people are doing in the lake with the horse. Again, very specific. I wonder what a cat would think if it saw a dog in the mirror. Okay, that's nice because you don't need the photograph. I wonder why people's reflections are devils. Okay, maybe that's more general. Why girls go together to the loo. Okay, that's a very good one, maybe very cultural, but that would work without the photograph. I wonder if the green tomato feels unhappy. Okay, so I wonder if it's good to be different. I wonder if everybody has some evil and good in them. I wonder if we see ourselves in the same way that other people see ourselves. I wonder why people want to be different or the same. Okay, so some really lovely ideas there. Thank you for some more philosophical questions that you can then get students to try and discuss and answer. I wonder whether we are heroes or evildoers. Yeah, or both, Olga, probably. At some time, maybe not evil, but you know, we're not perfect, are we? I wonder what it would be like if horses could swim. Okay, very nice question, thank you. Right, I'm going to finish there, but I'm going to pass on one final website, if that's okay, and I'm going to put the link into here. This is a really great website, and I have to thank my colleague Nick Peachy for this. So it's called tricider.com. And it's a free website. It's great for giving students thinking time and getting them to think outside the classroom. I'm just going to type it into the box here so I can show you what happens. It's very simple to use. Basically, you ask a question. You ask a question and your students have to answer it on the website for homework. So they have to come up with ideas. And then they can read each other's ideas and they can comment on those ideas, they can even rate them. It's really, really simple, and as soon as it comes up, I'm going to show you. Right, you enter your question here. So what's the best way of getting students to develop ideas. And then you click on Go. And eventually, it's slow now because we're doing this via the webinar. Okay, so it has 14 days. You can change the deadline if necessary. Now I'm going to share and invite. So now I'm going to copy and paste this link here in the box below. Doesn't want to paste it. Come on, paste. Okay, it's not letting me paste it. But what would happen is you can email your students or you give that link to them. So if you want to, if you're a fast typist, you can type it into your address bar. And what happens is underneath you can add an idea, and students add their ideas to answer the questions. And then they can add more ideas and more support for that. I'm going to take that away here, sorry, just so I can show you underneath. So now you can add an idea. So let's say add an idea. Give them lots of thinking time. I can add my name if necessary. It's not necessary if I want to. I don't want to share. Thank you very much. I don't want to log in. There we go. Oh, thank you. So we've got some watch my webinar. Thank you. So now you can add in the pros and the cons of each idea, and then students can vote on the ideas as well. It's a really lovely way to get students thinking outside the classroom and to give those quieter students, the ones that need more time to think, that time that they really need in order to think. Okay. So that's tricider.com. And I'll just go back to the slides. There we go. It's tricider.com. So thanks ever so much for listening. I've gone a little bit longer than I was supposed to, I think. But thanks so much for participating. I'm really happy to answer any questions you may have, and I'm hoping that Henry has collected them as you've gone along, because I've not been able to follow.
Hi everyone, it's Henry back here. Thanks Lindsay, it's a great talk and I hope everyone's taken a lot away from that. I have been looking out for some questions and I haven't seen too many come in yet, but I think what would be good to do, if that's okay with you Lindsay, is just spend maybe 5 or 10 minutes now, and if we can open it up to the chat, and anyone who wants to write in with a query, we can deal with it live in the webinar now. So please get typing if you've got anything you'd like to ask, and then
Helen, no, the Guardian videos, I don't think they can be down. Oh no, they're on YouTube. They're on YouTube, so yes, if you have a YouTube downloader program, you can download them. I guess there are copyright issues there, but there are, I usually use, what do I use? Video Grabber. Videograbber.net, I think, is the one that I use. Yeah, that can help you with that. Can you recommend, oh, I didn't catch that one, hang on, let me go back up. Can you recommend a web that contains games for younger learners to play in groups? So a website for younger learners to play in groups. I'm assuming this is kind of thinking activities. That's a really good question. I think if you search for Philosophy for Children, or P4C. There's a lot of materials on the internet for primary children in the UK. As I said, there's a big push now towards getting younger learners thinking. So I don't know specifically of a website, but if you look for Philosophy for Children, and 4 is normally the number 4, then you might be able to find some useful information or ideas that you can perhaps adapt. So I hope that's helped a little bit. The PowerPoint slides will be available. Yes, Dima, keepvid.com. That's the one I was trying to think of. Thank you very much. How many students do I have in my class? Yes, possibly fewer than you. We have a maximum of about 12 students, but sometimes more. Sometimes we teach more, but they're not normally more than about 20. So we do have quite small classes. Yeah, so the slides will be on available for you to take the materials away. And Henry can tell you that in a moment, I think, where the link will be available. Do you think these activities would be good for a TOEFL prep class? I think for sure, why not? I think that they do have to think about some of these things for TOEFL. I think I'm not as familiar with TOEFL as I am with IELTS. I think if there's a writing paper and they write an essay, which I think they do, then it's definitely useful, I would say. But again, it depends on your circumstances. It depends how good your students are at developing their skills. Some students are very, very strong at this already. Christiana, the best age for a child to start learning English abroad? Oh, I'm not sure that's my expertise here. I think it probably depends how comfortable you are with your child going abroad. I know some parents take their children abroad. I don't know. I think that's really down to you. We run courses for children that are quite young, maybe sort of 8 or 9 possibly. I think it's difficult. Difficult one for me to answer, sorry. What would you do if students are really shy? Give them lots of thinking time. Allow them to develop their ideas, perhaps use websites, give them things to think about for homework, and really give them lots of time to talk in pairs and to talk with a partner in a pair, and to use really the classroom management techniques that we use to draw them out in open class. So we might ask them to contribute to the whole class, only when we know that they have something to say. So perhaps when they're discussing in pairs, to monitor and listen, and when we know that they've got a good idea, drawing them out in open class so that they contribute and feel really good about their contribution, and not asking them or putting them on the spot. And I think really, for me, that's a classroom management issue. I hope that's helpful. Just going through here. Teaching Young Learners to Think. This is a great book. Okay. If students are full of creative ideas and are resourceful as well, but have language barriers, well, then you can use their creative ideas and resources and use activities like this that they'll enjoy, and then obviously give them lots of language to support them in their task. So give them language frames, give them structures that they can use in their discussion and really support them with the language rather than the thinking. I think that's the key there. Okay. Okay, I think that's all the questions I can see at the moment. Henry?
Yep.
Where will the link be for the slides?
Yeah, I'm just going to post the website that the slides and the recording will be made available on later on in the week. Hopefully by Friday we should have that already. So I'm sharing it with everyone now. So keep an eye on that. And you'll also all be sent an email as well, where we'll link you straight through to the recording too, and that will also contain the link to your certificate, which you get for free for having come along today and watched the webinar and participated. There's one last thing as well I'd like to remind you about, and that is our online conference, which is taking place next week. It's a series of webinars, 18 in total, on the Monday, Wednesday and Friday, and it's not too late to sign up now. It's all free, so I'd take a look at that if you've got time as well. That's it from me, and I'd like to just say thanks to Lindsay for taking the time to deliver the talk today. We're going to leave you now, so it's bye from me. And Lindsay, if you want to just say a few last words.
Thank you very much. Yes, thanks so much everyone for participating and asking questions. Thank you. I've enjoyed it. I hope you did too. Have a good day, everyone.
Okay, great. Bye, everyone. Take care. Cheers.
Bye. Bye.